Revelation?
What's that?
18 of Revelation.
18 Revelation.
Oh,
Yep.
it's my first time.
All right. No, we're in.
No, we didn't
Yeah.
finish 17, did we?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Yep.
We did right in.
Finished 17. We stopped before going into 18. So let me recap last week. So last week we saw the downfall of the prostitute and the beast, and the prostitute was Babylon. So here was the summary from last week. The great prostitute who was drunk on the blood of the saints rides the beast. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the beast will make war on the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome him. The beast and its horns, which are the Roman kings, will devour the prostitute, Babylon, and burn her up with fire. Okay? So that was last week, if you missed it. And we're going to move on to chapter 19, the fall of Babylon.
18.
18, sorry. I got my numbers mixed up. So we've been talking about Babylon being what? Rome, okay. But Rome specifically, but in a bigger picture, it stands for more of like the archetype of all evil empires, right?
Yep.
So let's just do like a group think here real quick. And what are some of the characteristics of evil empires?
Violence.
Right?
Tyranny.
Okay. What else?
Disregard for God.
Okay, so
Rebellion.
either atheism or maybe polytheism.
Mm-hmm.
Sexual immorality.
Okay.
Manipulation.
What else?
Greed.
Greed. Greed. This is a fun word that we don't ever use very often, but opulence.
Control.
Control. Okay.
Suppression. I
Uh,
guess that has to do with
yeah.
control, so.
Yeah. Two P's.
1 P.
The what? Why?
If you write it messy enough, you won't be able to tell.
Right.
That's a teacher in me. If you write it messy enough, you'll tell.
We are your spell check.
Yeah, I know. What else? Anything else? What was the kind of the big archetype in the Old Testament that John has been drawing on? Who was Babylon?
Prostitute?
Who was the like the evil empire that we've been working through that story?
Nebuchadnezzar, is that what you mean?
No, back farther.
Egypt.
Egypt, right? Okay. So Egypt is kind of becomes one of his like major echoes back to, right? So think of like Egypt specifically. What were some of the things? I mean, Egypt was obviously doing these things. Anything else?
Slavery.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. Okay.
They sacrifice humans sometimes, where they kill firstborns.
Right. So worship, we'll just put that under false. Sometimes that could be this. Sometimes it was also Pharaoh himself or kings. Okay? Is that a good enough list?
Extreme injustice.
Injustice? Okay.
That's pretty broad.
Okay. Anything else that we've seen in the book of Revelation that John has mentioned? I'm not looking for anything specific now. I'm just thinking, John's pretty much kind of touched on all of these, right?
Persecution.
Persecution, there you go. We haven't hit that one yet. Or it's not up here. Okay. It's a pretty good laundry list.
Yeah.
All right. So the cool thing is that this chapter talks about the fall of Babylon. And all of God's people have been waiting for this to happen. And it's something that Israel has been waiting to happen, waiting for. And Israel in the Old Testament was just constantly conquered and ruled by evil empires, right? By Egypt, by the Assyrians, by the Babylonians, by Rome. It was just one after another, after another, after another, right? And so God's people have always been longing for the downfall of Babylon, whether it's Egypt or any of these other Roman empires, and kind of the doing away with the destruction of all of these different things. And so this chapter is going to talk about the downfall of and the fall of Babylon and what that looks like. Okay, so tonight we're going to be focusing on the fall of Babylon. So in order to do that, we want to remember a couple of things from the previous chapter. Okay, so in the previous chapter, John talked about the prostitute, right? He gives this image of the prostitute, and he says that the prostitute is Babylon, the city who has dominion over the kings, and the city is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the martyrs, right? So persecution, violence are on the list there. The beast and its 10 horns, which are the Roman kings we talked about, devour the prostitute, Babylon, and burn her with fire. Okay, so when we're talking about the fall of Babylon, we're talking about self-destruction. That God kind of goes hands off and allows Babylon to eat itself, right? I was thinking, what's a good picture of this? It's obviously kind of grotesque, but we think of the story of the Donner Party, right? Where it's they ate their own. This is what the picture is. It's that Babylon ends up being destroyed by itself. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight before we get into the text about this archetype of Babylon and how did we get here in the first place, right? So we're going to walk through just a little bit of the biblical narrative and go how did Babylon become Babylon, and what's some of the history here? Okay, so if we go all the way back to the garden with Adam and Eve are tasked with the task to rule over God's creation. They're to rule and reign. They're to be God's co-regents, right? And so they're to be ruling and reigning in God's place. And then what we see happen within the first generation is that Cain, this reigning over creation goes wrong. And Cain kills his brother. He rules and he reigns unjustly with violence, inhumanely, wrongly, right? Then, not far after that, this guy named Lamech comes and he multiplies Cain's violence. He kills somebody. So what happens with Cain is Cain is having a conversation with God. He's like, my judgment is too much to bear. And God puts a mark, right? We've heard of marks before, mark of the beast, mark of the lamb. He puts a mark on Cain to protect him so that nobody else will kill him. Well, Lamech uses this and he tries to double down on it. He kills, I think it's several people, and he says, well, if Cain is protected one time over, I'm protected 7 times over. So he takes God's mercy and he tries to take advantage of God's mercy, right? So he multiplies the violence. Then when we see by the time of the flood, the scripture says just before the flood that violence had filled the entire earth. And then after that, the first kingdom is established by Nimrod. How would you like to have been named Nimrod? Maybe naming their son Nimrod anytime soon. So it says Nimrod was the first mighty hunter of humanity, but he uses this hunting ability to kill people. He establishes his own kingdom with violence, and that's how Babylon gets established. Babylon is founded by Nimrod, who is this mighty hunter. And so Babylon becomes the icon, right? We all understand icons, right? Like Nike or Chevron or what, but Babylon becomes the icon of humanity's corporate rebellion against God. And so it's used repeatedly in that way. So as we progress in the biblical story, we start to see like these different versions, right? So if you've got Babylon 1.0, you see the Egypt story that we've been walking through is Egypt becomes Babylon 2.0. And Babylon oppresses God's people. We've walked through some of that narrative. The Israelites, and we talked about some of how that happens in Exodus. After God saves them, they spend 40 years in the desert trying to unlearn the ways of Babylon, right? But they're unsuccessful. And what happens is we see that Israel becomes Babylon 3.0. They escape Babylon, but then they become Babylon. And they forsake God for an earthly king. We see this in 1 Samuel 8. There's a story where God is trying to set up a theocracy. He's trying to set up a rule and a reign in which God is the king and he rules over his people. And they say, no, we want an earthly king. And they specifically say, we want an earthly king because we want a king to go and fight our battles for us. We want a Nimrod to go and do our violence so that Jerusalem can become like Babylon. And so they say, give us a king to fight our battles. And Samuel laments over this, and God laments, and he says, you know what? Give them what they asked for, but go and tell them what's going to happen. And then so 1 Samuel 8 is like this laundry list where God says, like, guess what? You want a king? This is what he's going to do. He's going to take your sons and your daughters, and they're going to go to war for him, and he's going to take your daughters and his harem. He's going to take all of your goods, and it's basically like this list of like how they're going to be oppressed by their own king that they're asking for. And so they get what they ask for, right? And it's kind of that theme that we've been talking about is a lot of times evil is like a boomerang. You throw it out there, and you reap what you sow. And we're going to see that again in a little bit tonight. Okay, moving on. There were the Babylonians and the Assyrians obviously also conquered Israel, but Rome really kind of becomes the big 4.0 of Babylon. And Rome is the ruling kingdom of Jesus' day. And we see that Babylon, the word Babylon, becomes this kind of catchphrase to refer to Rome. And we see that already in the writing of 1 Peter. So Peter says, she who is at Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends your greetings, and so does Mark, my son. So the church had already begun to use the word Babylon to refer to the evil empire that they were living in, which was Rome. Okay? So let's look real quick about what happens when Jesus visits Babylon. When Jesus visits Babylon, which is Rome, Jesus is called Lord, and these are some Greek words here in the parentheses. He's called a kurios, a Lord. He claims to usher in a kingdom, basileia, and he preaches the good news, euangelion, of peace through nonviolence. Okay. In contrast, Caesar was called a kurios, a Lord, who was in charge of a Roman kingdom, the basileia. He preached good news, the euangelion, of peace through violence. And so you start to see how the gospel writers used these same words within the Roman Empire to talk about a kingdom that was flipped upside down. All right? And so what happens when Jesus is in the Roman Empire? Well, religion and empire get in bed together, and they eat him alive. Jesus was accused of blasphemy by the religious elite and treason by the state. And so Luke, I think 23, I forget what it is now, 23 something, they come and say, like, we have found this man subverting our nation. And so the religious initiate Jesus' execution, and the empire carries it out, right? And so we have this, we see this, this marriage of religion and empire. Okay, so here are some of the things that John has talked about in the book of Revelation that are kind of in. This is why we kind of made this list here. Is some of the universal characteristics of Babylon. So oftentimes, all Babylons, have religious pluralism. We saw that in chapters 2 and 3, where there was talk of worshiping Greek gods, Zeus, Athena, Artemis. There's often a civil religion. So within that polytheism, there's this idea that like we don't care who you worship as long as your ultimate allegiance is to the empire, right? Your ultimate allegiance is to Babylon. And we see, I mean, that's the story of Daniel and lion's den, right? Is they say like you can worship your God, you can go eat your vegetables instead of your meat, but you're going to come down and bow down to the empire. If not, we're going to throw you into the lion's den. Okay. So one of the other characteristics is peace through the threat of violence. We've seen that already in Revelation 6:4. Opulence or great wealth from the merchants. That it's a center of import, and not just a center of import, but it's a center of import through exploiting other people. Okay, and that's we'll see that in this chapter tonight. And then also tonight, arrogance. So one of the questions that John asks in 13:4 is, who is like the beast? Who can war against him? Right? And so it's oftentimes this pride, this arrogance that's built up and backed by violence or national power or the threat of violence. Okay? Let me give you this because I thought about it when I was out on my run the other day, and I actually posted it on Facebook so that I would remember. And this is your. Oops, I don't want to click on that in my live feed. Okay, and so just here's your disclaimer, fair warning for the evening. Like we're going to talk politics and church tonight, and kind of mix the two, religion and empire. I know that's like you're not supposed to do those things, but John definitely does. Okay, so here's what I wrote down as I was after I got done running and was thinking about one of the principles of the book of Revelation: the degree to which Lamb followers, us, are uncomfortable with critiquing Babylon is probably proportionate to the level that we have become intoxicated by the great prostitute. Okay, I'll read it one more time. The degree to which Lamb followers are uncomfortable critiquing Babylon, calling these things for what they are, is proportionate to the level that we have become intoxicated by the great prostitute. I feel fair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Okay, so with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about, because we're going to fast forward post Jesus and look at a couple things, and then we'll get into the text. Okay.
There is no post Jesus.
What's that?
So there is no post Jesus.
Okay. So an interesting thing happens in the early church. If you're unaware of church history, right? We often think of early church in martyrs, but a shift took place in early church history within the first 300 years. In 306 AD, Constantine became the emperor of Rome. Everybody heard the name Constantine before, right? He was the first Christian emperor. And on February 313 AD, he instituted what was the Edict of Milan, which was an agreement to treat Christians benevolently within the Roman Empire. So here's the story behind how this happens. Emperor Constantine supposedly had a vision in which he saw a cross of light in the sky, and along with the Greek words, "In this sign, conquer." And this ushered in the era of Christendom, the marriage of church and state, and peace was established through violence. The church used the sword of the state to force people to convert to Christianity. Okay, and so what we see is there is a distinct shift of the church going from a persecuted minority to persecuting majority. Okay, and that's done through some of the characteristics of Babylon, mainly this one, right? It's conversion at the tip of a sword. Okay, and that, I mean, it's in some ways it's a move back to 1 Samuel 8, and a back to like, hey, we want to conquer and create our own Babylon. Okay, so we're going to critique our Babylon because it's the context that we're in. But just so you know, I'm not doing this because like I hate America. I would do this if we were in China, or if we were in Russia, or if we were anywhere else, right? Like this. So what this applies to more than just America, but like this is the context we're in, right? So like the question we have to ask as Americans is how is America like Babylon, right? We could ask the question, how is China like Babylon, or how is Russia like Babylon, or how is the Middle East like Babylon, or but like we don't live there. It's not our context. Okay, so we could ask this question: does American society, culture, government, does it possess any of these? Does it possess religious pluralism? Is there a civil religion? Is there peace through the threat of violence or the military? Do we have opulence or great wealth? Are we a center of import through exploiting others? And are we arrogant? Right? And those are like rough questions, but they're questions that John wants us to ask. Okay? Here, and this is coming in part just from some of the commentaries that pose this question and then answer this question as well. But some of the things that commentaries talk about when it gets into this question are these things. One is that America has operated with this idea of manifest destiny. So the idea that America is God's country, and it's the light of the world, and that in that sense, like no other country is God's country. That it operates with a myth of redemptive violence. So the idea that dying for one's country in military service is the highest form of civic devotion. And that it also has sacred symbols, holy days, language, music, and texts. Okay? So, take a breath. That was right. I mean, it's an important question that John poses for us. Now we'll get into the text and talk about kind of the overall, like what John is doing. Okay. Actually the first time we hear this phrase, so that our text opens with. Go ahead and turn to your text. So, 18:1. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory, and he called out with a mighty voice. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her. The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a portion of her for her in the cup she mixed, as she glorified herself and lived in luxury. So give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow, I mourn, I shall never see. For this reason, plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord who has judged her. Okay? This first phrase that we get, fallen is Babylon, comes from Isaiah 21. And it's interesting in light of some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past. So here's Isaiah 21, 9 through 10. Look, here come the riders, horsemen in pairs, and one saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon. All of the images of her gods lie shattered on the ground. O my people, crushed on the threshing floor, I tell you what I have heard. For the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Okay? To me, this gives justification. If you remember back to when we talked about the harvest, and there was a question of who is being crushed, right? Here, especially if John is pulling from this text as a source text, here Isaiah says that it's God's people who are being crushed, right? Which is the argument that I made when we got into those harvest questions of who is being crushed. Okay, so here it agrees. Isaiah agrees with that. And previously, John has given us the traits of Babylon, right? So we're going to see these again in this chapter, but John is hearkening back to chapter 9. He says, the rest of humankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, or give up worshiping demons and idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, who cannot see or hear or walk. And remember we talked about the importance of those keywords, right? Of seeing and hearing and walking. And they did not repent for their murders, for their sorceries, or their fornication, or their thefts. So John has already kind of given us like a Babylonian laundry list of traits. And so we're going to see that again in this chapter. Okay? Let me read forward a little bit, and then we'll get into the judgment. So we left off at 9. And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys her cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet, cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble. Cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, and sheep, horses and chariots, slaves, that is, human souls, and that's that word there is psyche, lives, that we've talked about previously. The fruit of which your lives long has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels and with pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all the shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors, and all those who trade is on the sea stood far off, and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like this great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich with her wealth. For in a single hour she had been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more. And the sound of the harpist and the musician of the flute and the players and the trumpets will be heard in you no more. And a craftsman of any craft will be found in you no more. And the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the ones of the earth, and all the nations were deceived by sorcery. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and all who were slain on earth."
Yeah.
Okay, observations. Where's my erase? There it is. As we read through that, thoughts? What sticks out?
This reminds me a little bit of people giving away their sin, but they really don't want to give away their sin, if you will.
Okay.
Like, the Babylon is evil, but Babylon has so much nice stuff to offer. It's a pity that it's going away.
Right. Yeah.
Lack of repentance.
Right. Yeah, they're mourning their personal loss, right?
Mhm.
Yep. And we'll get into that and who does it and why. Okay. What else sticks out? Just as we ran through that.
Lots of arrogance,
Arrogance.
huge
Yeah.
arrogance.
Lots of lists.
Yeah.
A lot of repetition. Anything else stick out? No? Okay, let's let's review real quick. What's our sevenfold pattern? One through four is yep. Death. Destruction. 5 is Lamb or Dragon. 6 is and 7. Okay. Okay. It's funny as you continue to see how John uses this pattern. I wasn't even thinking about this pattern as I was going through studying this, and then as I got through, I was like, oh wait, he's using it here too. I hadn't even dawned on me that he was using it again. But so 1 through 4 are going to be the judgments of Babylon. 5, we're going to see a difference between those who mourn and those who rejoice. Okay, so we get both dragon and the lamb, where previously we had only gotten kind of an either or. Day of the Lord, we're going to see the question of vengeance at the end. Okay, and then Kingdom Come, we'll get into next week, and that will be in 9b, and this is going to be the marriage of the Lamb. Okay, so we're going to get to there tonight. Okay, so judgment for Babylon comes mainly in 4 different ways, right? So we see that Babylon has misdirected worship. They're condemned for becoming a dwelling place of demons, and we've seen in John's book that demons often elicit idol worship, right? And so it's one of the aspects of Babylon is idolatry, and so they deceive through sorcery. Babylon is judged for misdirected sexual desire. These first two things are both like good things, but misdirected in the wrong way, right? Condemned for becoming a place of sexual immorality. Number 3, wealth wrongly gained, and we see this as they're condemned for their luxurious living, especially at the expense of slavery. And 4, they're condemned for shedding the blood of the prophets, the saints, and the people of the earth. Okay, so these are, if we're going to look at like that list that we made, right? These are probably like the 4 main pillars. And you talk about like there's nothing new under the sun, right? Sex, money, power, and worship. We don't talk about that one, but it should be added as the 4th, right? Sex, money, power, and worship. Because what did Bob Marley say? You gotta worship something, right? And he was right. I mean, we're made to worship. So what is the fate of Babylon? The fate is plagues as a result of their sin in 18:4. 18:6 says she will drink the cup that she mixed. Remember we talked about this idea of that she is drunk with the blood of the saints, right? She's committed the violence. Now she's going to drink the blood, and that was the picture that we got back where like the blood as high as the horse's bridle, like 180 miles long, right? It's she gets to drink that, the blood of the saints, and so we've talked about that in 14:10, 16:6, 17:6. There will be torment and mourning, and really the torment and mourning is the people express that they're being tormented because they're losing Babylon, and they're mourning because they lose Babylon. So that's the torment and mourning in this chapter. They're expressing their loss of all of the opulence and the luxury and all of those things. And then finally, ultimately, it will be death. So if we look at 18:8, for this reason her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned with fire. And then later, in verse 21, so will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will be found no more. Okay? And in order to fully understand what that means, we have to go back to 17:16. So if we turn back to 17:16, what we see is we've already been told how Babylon is destroyed. It says, "And the 10 horns that you saw, which were the kings, they and the beast will hate the prostitute," they hate Babylon. "They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her with fire." Right? So that's that self-destruction that we were talking about. And oftentimes we see this with judgment in the Old Testament is God says, okay, I'm going hands off, and what happens is the foreign army comes in and destroys and does what it's going to do, right? And so it's this idea of self-destruction. Okay, so here we see 2 different groups, those who mourn and those who rejoice. And it's kind of who you would expect. Those who mourn are those who are in authority, those who are ruling Babylon, the kings of the earth in 18:9. And why do they mourn? They weep and wail because they used to live in luxury, and now they're not going to anymore. We see also the merchants are those that make a domestic prophet, right? So in 11, they weep and mourn for her since no one buys her cargo anymore. And then we have this whole long list of all of the cargo. And then at the end of verse 13, we find out that this was all done off of slave labor. And so they weep and mourn because they're not going to have slave labor anymore, and slave labor has brought them luxury. Okay? And the same thing with the merchants in verse 15. They weep and mourn because the great city that was clothed in fine linen and scarlet and purple and gold has been laid waste. And third, we see those that make a foreign profit, right? The shipmasters are the ones that are making all of the profit off of the foreign trade. And so it says they stand far off. They kind of get out of Dodge, and they cry because of the smoke of her burning. And they ask this question, right? And when John asks the question, he's really asking us to pose the question, which is, what city was like this great city? And what he's doing is he's planting a seed, because where do you think we're headed? Right? So, this is where we're headed. Take this out of my mouth for a second. Babylon, which is the harlot, has to be destroyed so that the bride, which is Zion, can be married. See the symmetry? Okay, and so here we're getting the first step, and we're going to read about this next week. So he's planting that seed of saying, like, hey, who is great? Who is like this city? And then he's going to answer that question. Oh, it's Zion, and it's coming. Okay? And then there's also a group who rejoice. The Lamb followers. Dragon followers mourn, Lamb followers rejoice. And we see that as the saints and the apostles and the prophets and the great multitude in 9:1 that we'll read right now. Okay, so we're going to read just a little, or 19:1, sorry. We'll read a little bit of 19:1 through 5, and then we're going to stop before we get to the marriage supper. And we'll wait on that till next week. After this I heard what seemed to be the loud voice of a great multitude in heaven. We've seen this multitude several times before, right? We were introduced to them back in chapter 4 and chapter 5. They're crying out, "Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, for his judgments are true and just. For he has judged the great prostitute, Babylon, who corrupted the earth with her immorality and has avenged her blood of his saints." Right? And so this question has been, was all the way back in chapter 6, where the saints were saying, like, how long, God, until you bring vengeance? How long until you bring vengeance, right? And then there was this question of, what is this vengeance going to look like? Is it going to look like Babylon vengeance, or is it going to be something else altogether that is created? And what we saw is that this vengeance is ultimately like self-destruction. God doesn't even have to do anything. Evil just self-destructs. It eats its own. Once more they cried out, "Hallelujah! The smoke from her goes up forever." And the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures fell down and worshipped God, who was seated on the throne, saying, "Amen, hallelujah." And from the throne came a voice saying, "Praise our God, all you his servants, you who fear him, small and great." Okay, quick note on, I was actually, when I was driving over here, I was listening to this pastor talk about chapter 18. And he took it very, very literally. And so his thought was like, oh, well, this has to be Babylon. Well, Babylon doesn't exist, so Babylon has to be rebuilt. So in his mind, like, Babylon has to be rebuilt in order to be destroyed, right? Which also, like, it just seems very odd to me that, like, he thinks that Babylon needs to be rebuilt in order to be destroyed. Especially when we look back at that First Peter text, right, where Peter is saying he's talking about Babylon, and when Peter was writing that, Babylon didn't exist. So it's fairly obvious that he's using coded language, right, and that John here is also using coded language to talk about Rome. I'd be curious to ask him, what does he think about that First Peter text? Like, does he think Peter is like using coded language there, or is he being literal? But so the reason I say that is because we've talked about, like, sometimes John uses hyperbole, sometimes he exaggerates, sometimes he uses symbols. One of the other texts that we just read has oftentimes, I think, been taken literally and shouldn't be, which is this idea of the smoke from her goes up forever and ever. That phrase, or that idea, actually comes from Isaiah 34, 9 through 10. And Isaiah is talking about the destruction of Edom, and he says that Edom is set ablaze and it won't be quenched, and that the smoke from Edom being destroyed will go up forever and ever. Well, we know that Edom is not still on fire today. Like, you can't still see smoke rising from it. The idea of, so there's two ways that you can take the idea of not being quenched. And one of them, I think, makes a lot more actual literal sense than the other. So you could say something isn't quenched because it burns forever, right? Or you could say that if it's unquenched, then what happens to a fire that's not put out?
Smolders.
It ultimately burns up all it can, and then there's nothing left, right? And then there's smoke, but the smoke doesn't last forever, right? So the language of unquenched doesn't mean that something is burning forever. It just means that nobody or nothing can put it out, that it's going to completely destroy. Does that make sense? Like, if you said, like, my house caught fire and the fire was not quenched, like, you would say, my house is burning forever, right? You would say, like, and now it's ashes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So in 19:2, we see, how does God avenge the blood of the saints? This was a question that we looked at back in 16:10. How long? How does Babylon fall? Well, we covered that. I went through that already. The 10 horns, the kings, and the beast devour her. And the smoke of Babylon's torment, i.e. the destruction, goes up forever. And that's just it's a hyperbolic way of him saying completely like utter destruction, right? Like, I put the logs in the fire, the logs, like, nobody came to put the fire out, and now there's ash, right? It doesn't mean that, like, the wood in my fireplace is magic and it burns forever and there's always going to be smoke.
It's like the judgment, and it's eternal.
Right, it's done, yeah. It's complete. It's a way of saying it's complete. Okay, so here is our summary. We're still doing good on time. Babylon is the evil empire humanity creates when we fail to follow the ways of the Lamb. The fate of Babylon is death. Lamb followers seek to establish God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, and Zion is characterized by rightly aimed worship and allegiance. Okay? We got 20 minutes. Thoughts, questions, discussion? We can go, we got 20 minutes to go anywhere we want with it.
So you brought up 3 Babylons: Egypt,
Right.
Israel, and Rome. Roman Empire. Would you say those 7 characteristics right there?
Egypt was, Israel?
Israel.
Yeah, Israel
and
kind of
Roman Empire.
becomes. Yeah.
Would you say the fall of all of those follow those same 7 characteristics right there? Or is John saying that, or is he just speaking about Babylon in general?
I mean, ultimately, if the Babylon doesn't eat itself, its pride and arrogance is usually its downfall, and it's superseded by a bigger, badder Babylon that's more hungry than it is at the time, right? I mean, name a empire that has not fallen, right? I mean, I don't even know what's the longest reigning empire we have today. I mean, it's good, but it can't be more than a couple hundred years old, right?
No.
I mean, like that's just the nature of empires. Is like they take on that laundry list of characteristics, right? Because of us, because of like sinful people, and it becomes this place where like there's oppression and there's slavery to get wealth, and like sexuality goes everywhere, and there's violence, and it just and then the city eats itself, right? I mean, like look at what's happening in San Francisco right now. You know, I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but just from the little of what I saw, I mean, I think even that Portland's having similar issues. You know, I mean,
A lot of the big cities.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
Portland, New York
just
City,
look at what
Miami.
happens to big cities that run amok.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a nightmare.
they have to be defended by the threat of violence, and then if they're not, then it eats its own.
All
Yeah.
those characteristics that we put up there earlier of Babylon
Mhm.
are starting to resemble our nation.
America is Babylon 5.0.
I mean, you even look, so I was telling Trish, but slavery, but then just even after watching that movie,
Yeah.
I mean, just the
Some of the fruit.
sex trade,
Yeah.
that's more slavery than
Right.
maybe any country's ever seen in the world. Ever.
But how many American companies go overseas and basically use slave labor
Right.
to make the products that we consume here?
Yeah. I mean, how many, look at our, abortion in America. How many, have died. I mean, our national defense budget, I mean, that's what this picture was. I didn't harp on
Little
it.
chart, yeah.
But it's small, but that's our defense budget compared to all of the other, leading nations.
What you're not seeing is the percentage going to the Ukraine. Sorry.
That's why it's so big.
But I mean, we just have to, as Lamb followers, it's not that, we can run and live in another Babylon or try to live outside of a Babylon, but Babylons are always going to exist. And they're made up of, it's like the same reason why the church is never going to be perfect, because it's made up of people, right? And the ultimate goal is to get Babylon out of us. That's in a sense why God takes the people into the desert, right? He takes them to the desert and he says, okay, you're going to rely just on me, and you're going to have food just for one day, and I'm going to provide it every single day. You're going to gather it, except for on Saturdays, you're going to gather it twice, and you'll have it for Sunday, and I'm going to teach you dependence, right? And what do they say? Were there no graves in Egypt that we had to come out here to die?
Yeah.
Right? One of my favorite lines in the Bible. Like God rescues them from oppression. He gives them, literally it says, he gives them the plunder, the gold. The Egyptians go, here, take all of our gold, take all of our stuff, just get out of here, right? They're handing over, they go out in the desert, and they're like, we'd rather be back there, right? And it's that sense of, the luxury and right. They'd rather live in Babylon, right?
Until they get back there.
Yeah.
We're never
Maybe,
satisfied.
or you know what? I don't know how many of you guys have seen The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. Several of you? Okay. There's this great scene in The Matrix, right? Where one of the guys, so if you don't know The Matrix is the story where like people are like in pods and they're living this fantasy like in their heads. They're not actually like living real life. It's all like just in their heads, right? So the people are being set free from the Matrix and they're getting to see like real life for what it really is, right? But it's not like as pretty as you can imagine the utopia that can be built in your head. So this guy gets free from the Matrix and then he goes back in and he's, sorry, R2 is calling.
When movies collide.
Yeah. Not now, R2, it's not They're trying to make a different movie reference. Yeah. So he gets free from the Matrix, but then he goes back into the Matrix to help free other people. But then he's sitting there and he's eating like steak and he's having this conversation. He's like, I know this steak isn't real, but it tastes so good. And my mind thinks it's real and I'm imagining it. And he's like, I'd rather live in the Matrix where I know that I'm a slave. Or I'd rather live in Babylon and live in this fantasy world than to like get out of the Matrix and know the truth and live in the truth. And I mean, we're all like that to some extent, right? Like, we'd all like to sit here and pretend that like those phones just come poof out of the air and like there aren't issues with how we like got them, you know? But yeah. So the hard thing for us as Lamb followers is to make that list of Babylon and be constantly aware of it. And be constantly aware of the fact that Babylon is trying to intoxicate us. And the degree to which like we have a hard time critiquing those things is the degree to which we've drunk the Kool-Aid. And so like we have to keep each other accountable as Lamb followers to go like, hey, stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Hey, stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Remember who we serve. Remember who we worship. Remember who our allegiance is to. Remember what we're called to. Remember how we're supposed to live in Babylon in the midst of a place that's not our own as we await Zion that's coming that's way better than this, right? And let's not eat our own in the midst of it. Let's teach people this other alternative way of the land. Some big bites to chew, I know.
In some ways, I think it's easier to accept that than the illusion that we can change Babylon.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I struggle with like just the idea like I'm just one person. What can I do, right? Like how, like if I like my vote's not gonna matter, so why vote? You know, or like I can't shop where I'm outside of Babylon, so like I just have to like recognize, you know, yeah. So it's hard not to give in to that. I mean, man, it's especially you know the more Babylon becomes Babylon, the harder it is.
You said something. Your quote that I probably got it wrong. The degree of which the lamp followers critique.
Yeah. The degree to which we are uncomfortable criticizing Babylon is equal to the level we have been intoxicated by Babylon.
And I won't say specifically, just even though we're talking about religion and politics, but I will say that I've stopped consuming certain products. I've stopped shopping in certain places because it was made known to me that I was supporting something that I don't really support, like abortion.
Right.
And when I shared that with someone else, they kind of gave me a reason to not, like kind of like, well, you're gonna just give that up, like that's like something you really like, and like how could you live without that? Like how could you live without that? You can't just quit it cold turkey, you know? And it was like that was a hard thing for me because I was like, I love this place. Like, how am I gonna not like go here and just quit it? but then I had the conviction in my heart that I was supporting something very important, and then I was able to put it cold turkey.
The conviction.
Because the conviction was strong, and then like you were saying, like, I'm a follower of the Lamb. So, I mean, it's not perfect, but, you know.
I love how Matt Walsh says that as believers, it is difficult if we're all having our own little things that we're trying to give up or stay away from, but if we focus collectively, like
Right.
what's happened to Budweiser.
Yeah.
Like if we focus collectively on one thing, then we can make a difference in this world.
Well, by sharing that, thank you. You know, it's encouraging for other people to
Yeah.
shed light and like,
And then talking about what happened with George Floyd, how he got murdered, and we're talking about one person can't change the world, but look what the policeman that killed him did. Because look at the difference that we have now since his death.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this book is about. And that's why John says, like, we're blessed if we read it, is because ultimately this is what he's telling us. The church is called to embody an alternative community, right? That's all of chapter 2 and chapter 3. How do you live as an alternative community?
It's like being in the world but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you live being faithful even to death, pledging your allegiance to the Lamb, worshiping the Lamb, embodying the ways of Christ while you live in Babylon?
stay closer as a community.
Yeah, I mean, it takes us like being focused upward
Right.
and also horizontally together. Yeah. Yeah. So the good news comes next week, where we talk about the wedding of the Lamb.
Good stuff.
Christ's return. Christ establishes, like the last 3 chapters are the best part, you guys. Like this is like the stuff that we are waiting for. Yeah. So this is the fun stuff. So don't miss the next 2 weeks. But we get to talk about Christ's return, the God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, that Zion, Jerusalem gets established here on earth, the return of the tree of the life. There's no more weeping or mourning or crying, and like resurrection, all that kind of cool stuff is all coming in the rest of 19, 20, 21, and 22.
Are there 2 more or 3 more?
We'll do 2 more, I think, right? Is there 2? Where's that? Can't see behind you. Pull that shade. Is it 2? It
So
should
our
be.
last day is the 24th?
I think it's on the 24th.
24th.
Is it?
No. Even though it's sunny.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have cheap on me. Yeah, so I think the goal then is to finish. So what we will do is we'll hit 19b and 20 next week. So that will put us in the marriage supper of the Lamb is the rest of 19. And then
And all of 20? Yes, sure.
yeah, 20, and that is at the end of 19, and then 20 is the Battle of Armageddon, and that is like the interesting thing about that is like John kind of sets us up for like this epic battle, and then there is no battle. It's like the battle that never happened. In fact, I think my final battle. That's where we're going. And there's some interesting stuff in that one next week. There's probably all sorts of things that you have heard about the millennium and the 1,000-year reign, and we see Jesus on the horse with a sword coming out of his mouth. So we'll talk about some of that, the Battle of Armageddon. So that'll be next week, and then the final week will be the new heaven and the new earth. Okay? And you guys will have gone through the entire book of Revelation.
Wow.
you can believe it.
And I mean, I've learned more in this class than I have ever learned in a Bible study before. I
Thank
mean,
you.
seriously.
Thank you.
Me too. It's great.
Well,
Good job, teacher.
thanks for thanks for coming. It was just me. Just be me and the camera, or me and Joe and the camera.
Please hit the tip jar on your way out.
Right. Yeah, I should have put my guitar.
Open the guitar case.
That's all we got. Cool. Any other closing thoughts, parting shots?
Are you gonna do another Bible study after this one?
Yes, I think I'll take a little bit of a pause, and then we'll start back up something else if there's interest. I think maybe we'll talk at the end about if people have interest in doing one, and maybe where we go from there, or maybe we cycle back to like some of the life's big questions, and we do like a topical, like if people have some topics they want to do or want to revisit, we could do that as well. So
Cool.
I guess you just go either way with that. Yeah. Cool.
Everything's going to seem easy after Revelation.
I know.
I don't know. There's
I think you can make
you got,
anything
yeah,
challenging.
there's all sorts of stuff. All right, let me pray for us. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for this faithful crew that has come and just dove in to this meat and potatoes book, this challenging revelation that can seem daunting and overwhelming and confusing. And God, we know that you have promised blessing for those that work through this tough text. And God, we just pray that you would continue to teach us what it means to be on Team Lamb. God, we look forward to the fall of Babylon. And we confess, God, just corporately and individually that Babylon is in each one of us. And we, in some sense, have a part of making it. And so, God, we confess that. We ask for forgiveness, and we long for you to heal us so that we can strive for not building Babylon, but to build Zion. So thank you for this week, and we're excited to celebrate and learn about the marriage supper of the Lamb next week. We love you. Amen.
Thanks, David.